They all just got up and left. I'm Lorraine, an alcoholic, and y'all have a problem. I don't have a problem because I can talk for the next 3 hours. But since you have more things planned and I can't see a clock, if anybody would loan me their watch, if they still have watches anymore, I'd appreciate it. I will give it back, I promise. Okay, well then, we'll wing it. Oh, thank you. Will it stay on the whole time?
Yeah, you just have to press this.
Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll try this. Okay. I'm Lorraine, and I am an alcoholic. And thank you. Thank you, Donna, for asking me, and Diane for encouraging Donna to ask me. So it's all about service, and that's what it's about. And what I really liked is during the countdown is so many people with just a few months and years, just a few years here being present to find out what service is all about, what kind of service they'd be interested in. That's great, because I'll tell you, if it hadn't been for service, to keep me here, to keep me busy at the beginning, I don't know that I would be here. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. And put my service in there, because I am still in service. I've been sober, as you saw, 33 years, and I have been active since I was 4 months sober in some type of service. So anyway, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I was born to two people who did not drink. There was not a lick of alcohol anywhere in the house, and yet my two brothers and I were raging alcoholics, and we came out as alcoholics. Turned out my parents hadn't had a drink. My mother went 55 years on a white-knuckle dry drunk, and my father didn't last that long. He only lasted about 48 years on a white-knuckle dry drunk. And that's a long time to be raising 3 alcoholic kids and not take a drink. The house was quite dysfunctional. So anyway, to fix the problem, they moved us to California to get us away from Detroit, and that was going to make us better, which it didn't. It just gave us more daylight hours, more blonde men, more blue eyes, and that's it. That was the only difference. So anyway, when I came out to California, I was 13 years old. I hadn't attended school in quite a while. I was running the streets. I was acting like a fool, looking for alcohol at all times. My parents didn't know what to do with me, and so when I came home with this gorgeous man and said that I wanted to get married, my parents were all for it. Of course, we lied and said I was pregnant at the time. It didn't take long to get pregnant either. And, they didn't even ask, does he have a job? Well, he wasn't even 18. I was 15. And he was husband number 1. And so they are numbered, and that's the only way I can keep track of them. So husband number 1 was young. He was cute. He was heavy into drugs. It was the 60s. He would come home. I was living in San Jose. In fact, Teresa and I drove here today. I know I made her crazy, because as we're driving along, I go, oh, that's Coe, oh, that's Kurtner, and it's like all these streets that I used to run, and I was just remembering them all, because I haven't been to that area in quite a while, and, so anyway, I just lost it there, but, we got married, and it was the early 60s. It was 1962, and I was living down over in this area, and he would go up to San Francisco, and he would come home, and he would be painted. He'd come home painted, different colors on him, and I didn't understand it, because I didn't understand anything about what was going on there. He wanted to protect the little woman. I mean, I was home with our baby boy, pregnant with another one, and I didn't do any of that stuff that was going on in San Francisco. I mean, I was pregnant, for God's sake, so I only drank beer, and I knew better, and took the pills for my nerves that the doctor prescribed, because I was a nervous wreck living with this man. And we were married a couple of years. It was a bad marriage, so we had a second baby, and it didn't fix the marriage, and so we got divorced. It was violent, it was ugly, and so I didn't know how to live. My parents didn't want me back. who could blame him? I'm 17 years old. I got 2 kids in tow now, and I'm still drinking. Nothing had ever stopped me from drinking. And so I went out to find somebody to take care of me, and I found husband number 2 being very sharp. I knew better than to go for another good-looking, poor 17-year-old man. So, boy. So I got a man who was older than my father, and he had lots of money. And he gave me a Cadillac. He courted me. He bought me a fine home up in Blossom Hill, and everything should have been perfect. And he was a gambler. He loved to gamble, and he used to take me to Reno and Tahoe with him, and he'd put me on a bar stool, and he'd be over there playing cards and stuff, and he'd point out his little trophy bride who wasn't even 18. He'd point out, that's my woman, and pretty soon he'd look over, and I'd be picking up the guys, and then I'd be sliding off the bar stool, and so he quit taking me. And he started leaving me at home, because now we had a baby girl. The marriage was getting bad, so we had a baby, and we had a baby girl. So now I got 3 children and a husband that's hanging out in Reno and Tahoe. He owned his own business. He owned a fencing company, and got me this gorgeous home in Blossom Hill. It had a family room and stuff, and he came home unexpectedly one day, and I was drunk on the family room floor with his foreman. And so he didn't like that. And so he threw me out. He threw me out, and he kept the foreman. And he did say, he could get a drunken broad anywhere, but good foremen are hard to find. And 25 years later, I go to his funeral, and there's the foreman. It's like, anyway. So husband number 2 didn't work out. Now I'm out in the streets, and I've got, I'm still drinking the whole time. Only now I've graduated to, having vodka and orange juice in the morning, beer constantly. I mean, this was just my life. I never thought anything about it. And I got 3 kids, and I know that it's not working out to get married, so I want to get a job and support myself. So I went to work in a beer bar. I moved in with Mom. Mom took pity, let me move in the back bedroom with all my kids. And I went to work at a beer bar, and I would come home after work, and I would read the kids bedtime stories and fix them dinner. I was trying really hard to be what I perceived was a good single mother, and raise these kids. And I was doing the very best I could, and it lasted about 2 weeks, because then I stopped coming home. I would send the money to the babysitter because I couldn't stop drinking. I was working in a beer bar, and when I would get off work, I'd go across the street to the hard liquor bar, and somebody would buy me a drink. I eventually, and I'm still a teenager, and I'm sleeping in my car behind the bar that I work in. I was passing out in my car. And the reason I was having to sleep in my car is because I had already gone home with all the owners and all the attendees of the bars. They were tired of taking me home for the night. So now I'm down to sleeping in my car. Things were not going well. And so I ended up in the hospital with the doctor telling me that my kidneys were failing, and that if I continued to drink the way that I was drinking, I was going to die. And so Mom let me come back so I could recuperate. When I got well enough, I went and got another job. The owner of that first bar would not hire me back, so I got my next job was at I almost said the name. It almost shot through there, but it was down here in San Jose. I got a job at another beer bar. And one of the first nights that I was there, I was literally crying in my beer one night to one of the customers, who later turned out to be husband number 3. And I was crying in my beer about how the doctor said I can't drink anymore. Now, I did not consider drinking beer drinking. And so I'm telling him, I just can't drink anymore. Doctor said I'm going to die. And he was also from the streets of San Francisco, and he said, well, I know things you can do. You don't have to drink anymore. So I got in the car with this strange guy. After I married him, I found out how truly strange he was. But I got in the car with this strange guy, and off we went to San Francisco, and we went to a gas station, a men's room at a gas station. And this is the class act you have up here cheering for you, you know. I go to a men's room at a Shell gas station, and two guys met us there, and I thought they worked at the gas station. One of them I really liked, so he became husband number 4 later on. But anyway, met these guys there, and they introduced me to the world of hard drugs. Well, you combine that with my constant drinking and my alcoholism and the way that I was thinking and feeling about myself, and I was off and running. I mean, there was a lot of crime in my story. There's a lot of crime. I went to jail repeatedly. I went to CIW. I went to CRC a couple times. I was off and running with the crimes. You know, I was not a nice drunk once you added in the illegal drugs. And I was just off and running. And so about 10 o'clock one night, I had married the one that took me up to San Francisco. And about 10 o'clock at night, we realized things were going really bad for us. That, you know, we were getting kicked out of apartments. We'd rent an apartment and sell the refrigerator and stove out of it, and then we'd have to leave. And so, you know, and we'd be moving the kids around. Things weren't going well. And so we decided to take a geographic. And at 10 o'clock at night, we put the kids in the car. We had 2 cars. We had an old Studebaker and my little T-Bird. And we put the kids in the cars, and we took off for Oklahoma City, where it's going to be good. Life is going to be good. And when we got to Oklahoma City, we realized we had no money, we knew nobody. And we're there with 3 kids and had no idea how to live, but thank God he was a career man, and so he went right to work, breaking and entering, and he went through the roof of a bar, skylight, and he fell down, he broke his leg. And so the police arrested him, and he ended up in McAllister State Prison in Oklahoma. And I'm there with 3 kids, but, you know, I'm now in Oklahoma, so I had to be like a country western song and stand by my man, you know, for a year. And so I waited till he got out of prison, and I had to support the kids, so I went and got a job. I went to work at the Clown Lounge. I think you know the kind of job I had. And it got bad. It got really bad because I was out there now without a man. Well, that's not true. My husband was in jail, but I wasn't without men, and a multitude of men. With my kids, you know, I mean, they had to see this, you know, back and forth. And one night I was at work, and my husband, number 2, showed up in the bar, and he put a gun in my face, and he said, "Give me my daughter. I don't want her to be like you." And he brought my daughter back here to San Jose, and he went to court, and he told the judge that he had found her at the babysitter's, and my husband was awarded custody. I did not see my daughter again for 10 years. I had my 2 little boys, and I drug them from here to there. It was miserable for them. They had a miserable life because of my lifestyle out there. When my husband got out of McAllister Prison, I came back to California, and I hunted up that man I had met in that bathroom, that restroom, and he was husband number 4. And he and I got married. And that was the longest marriage I had until I got sober, because we were together 7 years, and it was during those 7 years that he would go to San Quentin he'd go to San Quentin and I'd go to CIW. He'd go back to San Quentin and I'd go to CRC. And so we stayed married for 7 years because it was those constant state vacations that kept us from being together too much. But, you know, we would try so hard to not drink. We would try so hard. We would make up our minds. I remember getting up, and today I'm going to clean house. We're going to go shopping. We're going to do these things. And we'd try so hard, and by noon I would be drinking just one, you know, and then it would be over. And next thing you knew, we'd be selling the refrigerator and stove out of the apartment, and off we'd go. So I got pregnant during that time, and I got pregnant, and I didn't know I was pregnant until I was 5 months pregnant. And I delivered her at 7 months in my bed. My husband delivered her because I didn't even realize I was in labor. I had forgotten I was pregnant. And that's just how much I was drinking and the kind of lifestyle that I was living. And when my daughter was born, the police and firemen came in the apartment. The police had been looking for us anyway, and so it made their job easier. And they took me off to the hospital. I walked out of that hospital that very same day, and I left my baby. I did not go back and see my baby because I had to get back out there, and I had to run the streets again and get a drink. I always had something to drink in my hands. And my husband went every day to the hospital, and he held my daughter. He held our daughter until she was 6 weeks old and released from the hospital. We drove her right to his sister's, and she raised our baby because I was not fit to raise her. My 2 boys were taken from me by a judge. I stood before a judge, and he said, "You will never see your children again." And I would like to tell you that was my bottom, but it wasn't my bottom. You know, I ended up continuing to do the same thing and was sent back to CRC. And one day I'm in CRC, and I hear him say that there's an AA meeting down in the cafeteria. And somebody said to me, "You would probably ought to go to that, Lorraine." And I thought, for what? I mean, why? And she said, because they have donuts and coffee and cigarettes and men. So I said, of course I will go. And so I went to my first AA meeting to eat, look, drink, and smoke. And that's the only reason I went to my AA meetings, to the H&I meetings. And I went, and I didn't really hear him, and I didn't want to hear him. I stood in the back and kind of gave him the attitude. But they were there every Sunday. Every Sunday morning, those H&I people were out there. And it didn't matter if it was Easter, if it was Super Bowl Sunday. It just didn't matter. They were there. And when I was paroled at the end of the year, I went to the airport, and I got drunk, got on the plane, landed in San Jose, and I was off and running. And like a month later, I'm being violated by my parole officer and sent right back because nothing had changed the whole time I was locked up, even though I was attending those AA meetings. So when I got back, they called, the AA meetings happening, and so I figured, okay, I got to go. So I went to the AA meetings, and I went every Sunday again. Only this time I started paying attention. I started listening, and I started understanding and believing that Alcoholics Anonymous had something, that these people really believed. And when some of their stories, I thought, well, if they could get sober, maybe my husband could get sober. So my husband was in San Quentin, and I let him know, you need to attend these AA meetings, and our life can get good. So anyway, so when I got out, I had to go to Oakland to a halfway house because my parents didn't want me in Santa Clara County. They actually called my mom called parole board and said, we don't want her in Santa Clara County, so I had to start all over again. I ended up in Oakland. And when I got there, this time I didn't drink when I got out before I got on the plane. I knew better than to do that. I had figured out the altitude and the alcohol had done something bad in me, so I didn't do that. So I waited until after the woman gave me all the rules in the halfway house about how there's no alcohol, there's no drinking, there's no long-distance calls, yada, yada. And then as soon as she was done, I left, and I went down to just get one beer. I figured there's a liquor store down there, I'll just have one beer. So I went down and bought my six-pack, and then I don't know where I went, and I don't know how long I was gone, and I don't know who I was with or what I did. I have no recollection of after I picked up that first beer and drank it. I don't remember anything more. The next thing I remember is calling my husband a few days later, who was in Santa Rosa, and telling him, I'm home, come and get me. And he said, Lorraine, I can't live that way anymore. I want to get the kids. I want to have homes. I want to have job. He was a heavy equipment operator, and he says, I want to get a job back. I can't live that way anymore. I didn't understand what he was talking about. I had lived no other way my entire life. My entire life. From the time I was 12 years old, I had drank every single day. The only time I didn't drink is when I was being booked into someplace. And so I didn't know what he meant. And my response to him gives me a clue of where I was, because I said, yeah, whatever, just come and get me. I know where we can get some really good stuff. And he said, Lorraine, please don't take don't take our daughter from my sister. I don't want her to grow up to be like you. And the next day, my husband took his life. That was his way out of this disease. So I was all alone. Now, this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you, oh, my God, I hit my bottom. That was it. It's not. I went on for another 7 years with that kind of behavior. 7 years where I didn't know if my sons were dead or alive, where they didn't know where I was. For 4 years, my boys were told I was dead. And I just lived insane. I couldn't die. I couldn't live. All I could do was drink. I was in San Francisco, and I was stealing my booze, so money was no object. So I was stealing Ripple and sitting on the curb. That's the kind of life I was living. When finally my parole officer found me, and I ended up in a recovery program, and I would take people, my job as staff, I became a drug and alcohol counselor because, why not? I was doing well. And, and one of my jobs was to take everyone out to AA meetings. And then I'd come back, and they would go on passes. The clients would go on passes. And another part of my job was when they would come back, I'd shake them down and take anything off of them that they were trying to smuggle back in. And I would take it off them, and then I'd go in the bathroom and take it. And so things, once again, weren't going well. So I had to hit the streets, and I knew I couldn't make it in the streets. I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to stop drinking. I didn't know what to do. And so I hit the streets by marrying another one of the counselors. On his 1 year of sobriety, we got a rental house, we got 2 cars, we got jobs, we got 2 of the boys back, got visitation with one of the daughters, we got 2 dogs, we got neighbors, we got doctor's appointments, we got teacher appointments, we got Little League, we got laundry. That was my bottom. I could live in the world of the streets. I could live running and ripping and stealing, and I could live that life. I could live sitting on a curb drinking Ripple. I could not live in the world that you live in. I did not fit. I didn't know how to talk to people. Going to the grocery store was the most, I could not do it. So I took off, and I headed back for San Francisco, Skid Row, quit my job, leaving my kids, leaving the husband. Well, he wasn't doing good anyway. He had started drinking again, living with me. And he started drinking again, and so I was leaving him and headed back for Skid Row, and God intervened. God has been with me my entire life. God has been with me the whole time. But I can tell you one miracle from that day to this day after another has occurred in my sobriety, because instead of putting a burning bush or some stone tablets in the road to stop me, my miracle from God was he had a guy stop me 1 block from where I got in my car to go back to Skid Row, and the guy had 14 years of sobriety in AA, and he was a renowned 13-stepper, and I knew him. So he asked me how I was doing. I ended up in his apartment that night, and he was crazy about me. He kept me there. Oh, I have water. Thank you. I have it, Teresa. I have it. Thank you. I just get so excited I forget to drink. Never affected me before. Anyway, he was a renowned 13-stepper, and he kept me locked up in his apartment for 3 days, and I thought, oh, my God, this is husband number, what would he have been? Let's see. I had 5. Okay, he would have been husband number 6, and after 3 days, he said to me, Lorraine, I can't have anything to do with a woman who's not in AA. Pfft, that's how I walked in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, if you're going to tell somebody you have to be here for yourself because things aren't going well, you have to da-da-da-da-da, please don't, because I came in for no other reason than to get that man to marry me so he could take care of me so I could live in the world. After I was here 6 weeks, he went off and married someone else after the Young People's Conference in Monterey. I think that was his wife number 5. But anyway, God has been present in my life the whole time. What happened to me was I came into Alcoholics Anonymous for all the wrong reasons. I did not know that I would make it. I stayed around and I kept taking men's portfolios. I was checking them out. I was like 32, 33 years old. I was hot. The clothing that I had on my body was about this much, And I was dropping things a lot in the room. And, it was like always up and moving, make sure you see me. And that was my behavior, and nobody threw me out. And because you didn't throw me out, I stayed in these rooms long enough to detox. And when I was about 4 months sober, I had someone say to me, oh, first off, I got to tell you, I asked him if I could secretary a meeting when I had about 3 months and no clothing. And they said, no, when you have 1 year of sobriety, you get to be a secretary. And I'll never forget that. They said, you get to be. It wasn't like them, it was something I had to earn. It was something I had to stay sober for. So anyway, when I was 4 months sober, I had a man ask me if I would chair a meeting for him. I said, of course. I had nothing to offer, absolutely nothing. It was all about Lorraine, but I figured that would help somebody if I talked to you all about me. So I went off to my first meeting. It was an H&I meeting. It was at a hospital in Belmont called Crystal Springs. And I went out there to do one meeting. I met a girl that night. She was in her late 20s, and she was gold. And, I did not know what alcoholism can really do. I knew you could go to jail. I knew you could have a drunk driving. I knew that you could kill somebody in a bar if you were drunk. And she died. I was back there the next month, and this young girl had died from cirrhosis of the liver from alcoholism. And I also found out at that place where I was doing meetings about wet brain and alcoholic insanity. These were things I did not know about. When I was sitting in the park at St. James Park here, and I'm passing a bottle with men 3 times my age, and we're passing the bottle around the park, and all of a sudden Joe would vanish. I never thought, I wonder if Joe is in the hospital, or, I wonder if Joe has gotten wet brain or something. You just found some other guy to take the place. And that night I found out what alcoholism can really do. And when I started doing that, I went out to chair one meeting, and of course they made me coordinator. I ended up coordinator for 5 years. I didn't have enough time to be an H&I, but they made me coordinator. And that was my first service. I've been an H&I for 33 years. I've just not stopped because that is my service. That is my heart. And so anyway, I started doing that meeting, and one of the nights after I was doing the meeting up at Crystal Springs, I walked out, and it's in the hills, and there's the stars and all this stuff, and it was evening, and I stepped out. I hadn't prayed to God for years. I had not prayed to God for years because when I was a little girl and I was in church, I hung around in church a lot because I was antisocial. I did not know how to get along with people at all. And so the Catholic Church worked well for me because they had a lot of invisible people, and they called them saints. And I would talk to them a lot, and I felt very comfortable, and I felt very safe, and I felt very loved in my church. But once I started drinking, I picked up the first drink, stole the first wallet out of some man's pants. I knew that God was so disappointed in me. I quit praying. I did not want God to know where I was. Not once when I went to jail, not one single time did I ever get on my knees and pray, please, God, get me out of this. I'll never drink again. I knew I'd drink the minute I got out. I had no choice. But that one of the nights when I walked out of Crystal Springs, I suddenly realized, I did not have wet brain. I had never, I could still drive. I still had 2 boys. I still had 2 of my kids. I had visitation with one. And I raised my hands up, and I told God, I'm here, thank you. And my entire life changed on that moment. My entire life changed. I have been so active in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is one reason I asked for the watch and got the phone, is because I'm so excited about AA. I got to be a secretary when I had a year. I've always been a secretary of a meeting. I would say out of my 33 years, I've probably been secretary of some kind of meeting for at least 26, 27 of those years. I've always been in some kind of service. H and I, when I was down here in Redwood City, we used to live in Redwood City, I was involved in the central office and in the central office advisory board. And I mean, I didn't have enough time to do this stuff. And that's why I say about all the newcomers or the people with not a lot of years, awesome. I mean, just do it anyway. And don't stop them, because some people, I'm telling you, if you had told me that I couldn't do these things, that I had to wait, the only thing I was willing to wait for was to be secretary, because I was going to those meetings anyway to find a husband at that time, so it didn't matter. I was going to be there anyway. But, being in service got me out of myself. It made me feel like I was of value to the world, that I could give something back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And what has happened for me over the years is, I got married to husband number 6, and we've been married 30... We've been married, I think, it'll be 31 years in December, I think, or maybe, I don't know. We've been married a long time. But I didn't marry him to take care of me. By then I had started doing my steps. I had a sponsor. She made me do the steps out of the big book, and that's another thing. I mean, I have always been sponsored and sponsor. I've always had that connection with AA. When I finally surrendered to Alcoholics Anonymous, I bought the package. I didn't have to argue. That part doesn't fit. That part won't work for me. I just bought the whole package. And I'll tell you what, I have been so happy. I've got a long-term marriage. My husband's in the program. He doesn't take care of me. In fact, he retired years ago, and I continue working. But I didn't need him to take care of me. I had God. And I got my 2 boys back. I got my girls back. The little baby I gave up, I didn't go see her at the hospital. She lives down in Fresno. We talk all the time. She's asked me to tell her the truth. Hardest thing I have ever done in my entire sobriety was to tell this baby girl that her father committed suicide because he could not get sober. I could tell her everything else. I could tell her the places I had gone, what I had done, who I had given my body, soul, mind to for a drink. But to tell her that her father could not find an answer to this disease was the hardest thing I ever did, but I did it because she asked me. Because I went to all 4 of my kids and I told them, anything I can do, any questions you ever have, you ask me, I will tell you the truth. I wanted to make amends to what I had done. My parents had kept me out of Santa Clara County. They told the parole department they didn't want me anywhere in Santa Clara County. And when my dad found out he was dying, my dad called me. My husband and I had by then moved up to Magalia up by Paradise, which is just a little bit above Chico for all of you who really are interested. And my dad called me and he said that the doctor had given him just a few months, and he wanted me to be the one to come down and take care of him. Can you imagine? And that's because of Alcoholics Anonymous, And then my son was down in Oakdale, down by Modesto, and he called me and he said, that his body, something was happening to his body, and the doctors didn't know what it was, but he needed me to help him. This was a boy that I used to say, Ray, I'm going to run up to the store and get some milk. He'd be 6 years old, and he'd be in charge of his 4-year-old brother and his 2-year-old sister, and I'd run to the store to get milk, and I swear to God I was going to get milk. I swear I was going to get milk, and I'd pick up a drink, and I wouldn't come home for 3 or 4 days, and he'd be taking care of his brother and sister. He asked me to come down and be with him, and I was working. I was able to hold a job. I've held 2 jobs. I held 2 jobs in 30 years. And I was always employed. Alcoholics Anonymous did that for me. Before that, the only kind of work I could do is I was a whore, and a bad one, because they had to be cute. So, and if they're cute, what are they paying for? But anyway, I don't know why I said that, but it's the truth. I was unemployable when I got here, and I've held 2 jobs, and so I was able to go and leave my job because I worked for someone in the program, and he covered for me, and I was able to go be with my dad for a few days in Santa Clara, and then drive over to Oakdale and be with my son for a few days and take him to doctors. And this girl that came from the curb, drinking Ripple on the curb in San Francisco, was able to look in the eyes of doctors in medical centers and say, no, that's not good enough. You need to find out what's wrong with my son. I became equal to the doctors. They were not better than me, and I was not better than them. And that's a miracle that Alcoholics Anonymous could do that. And this is about unity and service. And just let me tell you that my family has reunited. But one of the things that has happened is when my youngest son, moved up to Paradise, he wasn't able to get this program. He was really trying. He was going to NA. He was going to AA. And he was starting a Bible study, and he'd try, and he'd try, and he'd try, and he just couldn't get this program. And the damage had been done to his heart, he physically had damaged him. And I found him on his kitchen floor dead, and it was just like, what did I do with that? I mean, besides grieving like any mother would, I ran to a women's group, and I raised my hand. Right after I buried my son, I raised my hand and I said, I need to be secretary of this meeting. I knew that I needed to jump further into service. At the time I was regional chair for H&I. I needed to be secretary of the meeting. I needed, and then I went from that women's group to my home group. I have a home group. I've always had a home group too. I went to my home group and I raised my hand at the Big Book study, and I took the meeting from the secretary because I knew I needed more and more service. I needed to have a commitment because I was so fractured, I was so broken that I needed to be in the center of AA. I needed people to say, Lorraine, you got to open the hall. Lorraine, you got to do this, you got to do that. I had to show up because otherwise I don't know what I would have done. You people held me up to the hands of God when I needed you desperately, because I was in service. I have been, like I said, I've been, this is good. Okay. So, just between you and I was in H&I in Redwood City, San Mateo, the whole time of my sobriety, right? Out at the hospital, out, everywhere I could go. And I moved to Paradise, and I went to the first H&I meeting, and I raised my hand, and I said, I'd like to, I told them who I was, and didn't they know who I was? Here's my resume. And they said, we don't know you. And no, you can't be an H&I because we don't know you. And they didn't know me. And I didn't understand what they were talking about. But what it was when I went in, I said, hi, I'm Lorraine, an addict alcoholic, or an alcoholic addict. I don't know. But I had both in there. And the chair of the area said, no, you can't be an H&I. Because clearly I didn't know what H&I was about. And I didn't know what she was talking about. She would not allow me an H&I for like a year. Until I figured out, my sponsor finally pointed out to me what I was doing there. And so anyway, during that time, I got involved in general service. I was a GSR and then DCM. And, it's like, I got to go to the top. I got to be right involved. And then as soon as they let me back in H&I, I was back there. But anyway, I've been in service the whole time, my entire sobriety, and I don't know if that's what's keeping me sober or not. I don't know if I let go of my service, maybe I'd do absolutely fine. But why would I do that? I so much enjoy it. So about 7 years ago, I was in H&I, and I was, I think at the time, I was regional chair. And I was approached by 3 ladies in H&I, and they asked me if I would make myself available to be general chair of H&I. And I explained to them, no, that I didn't want to, that I wanted to start with just like attending the steering meetings and maybe being a secretary or, something like that. I don't want to be general chair. Well, anyway, they asked me to pray about it, and then they were very strong women, all 3 of them. And so I made myself available. to be general chair, and I got the privilege of being general chair for 4 years in H&I, and I absolutely loved it. And then when it was time for me to rotate out, I'm treasurer I'm currently the Northern California H&I treasurer. And just a little side note, I don't just do service away from, and H&I it's not that it's away from my home group and that, but I also want to be very connected in Paradise and Magalia, where I live, very connected, and not just going to steering committees and over here and there. And so I'm the treasurer of Paradise Intergroup, and I'm also the treasurer of Magalia Quality Sobriety, which is a meeting up there, and I am my home group's H&I rep. So, I'm very involved in that, in our community. And then I'm Northern California H&I chair, and so, I do stay busy, but I also have sponsees. I'm also sponsored. I have 22 grandchildren and great-grandchildren and 1 great-great-grandchild, and they all like me. One of the reasons I was not here earlier today is my son that I found on the kitchen floor that died, my baby boy, he has a daughter that lives here 3 blocks or something from here. I mean, it's so close. And we had lunch with her on the way here today. I got to be with my granddaughter. The judge I stood before the judge. He said, "You will never, never see these kids again." And I got to have lunch with his daughter. And what service has done for me, besides keep me here when I would have run many, many times. I would have run if I had not been connected, if I had not been committed to something in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I know that you've got a schedule here, and so I'm getting ready to wrap her up. And I'm going to close by telling you one of the things that service has done for me is when I was a general chair of Alcoholics. I'm general chair of Alcoholics Anonymous, thank you. No, when I was general chair of Northern California H&I, I would go into the prisons. They had me go into a couple of prisons where I would speak, where I would be the speaker at a banquet or something like that. And but I could never get a pass. They wouldn't allow me to come into any of the prisons. They won't clear me. But anyway, so I think I still have a couple husbands that are in them. But anyway, couldn't be me. So, I think about it. I'm going to veer off here for a second. You just think about it. The miracles of God, miracles of this program. The miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous are the simple fact that I have innumerable counts of forgery, counterfeiting, and robberies, and I'm the treasurer of Northern California H&I. And it's to the penny. It balances to the penny. But anyway, so I could go into these prisons and I would share the meetings, to the men. And one night I had the privilege of going up to San Quentin. And I was in the room at San Quentin, and I'm chairing a speaker meeting there. And I'm looking out at these young faces, and I swear they were very young. They all were the ages of my sons. And I'm looking out at the room, and I thought, my husband attended AA meetings in this room. My husband probably leaned against the wall in that room, and he died. He couldn't get this program, and he died. And my brother attended meetings in that room. And he, to this day, still has not been able to get Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's still out there running and dying. And my baby boy attended meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in that room. Sat in those chairs that those boys were in, and he didn't get this program. And I don't know why they couldn't get this program. I have no idea. I don't understand why God would allow someone like me to get this Alcoholics Anonymous, to get the sobriety and the gifts that I've gotten from it. But what I do know is I have a responsibility to Alcoholics Anonymous for giving me my life. And what I do with that responsibility is I drive from Magalia, California, out here to spend an afternoon with you and to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for not throwing me out when I acted inappropriately at the meetings, for not throwing me out when I called myself by all the wrong names and I used language that had just 4 letters in every word, that you put up with me. And you gently and slowly told me, come on, honey, you can sit down. You don't have to do that anymore. And that you didn't tell me, get out and shut up. And I thank you because you had patience with me, because you allowed me to stay in the rooms long enough to detox here, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I thank you so much for giving me a life. Thank you.